He once told me a Roomba could do my job. So I went back to work. Months later, he accidentally sent our daughter to school with prescription pills, and Child Protective Services showed up. My husband had always claimed that running our home was something a robot vacuum could handle. 3 months into my new job, our daughter was stopped by the police for bringing a bag of narcotics to school because he'd packed her the wrong lunch. Now, she's known as the drug girl. Child Services visits us every week, and I almost lost the promotion I'd spent 15 years fighting for. All of this happened because the man who ridiculed me for doing the bare minimum couldn't manage to pay the electric bill, do the laundry, or even check a calendar. Yes, I'm still married to him, but that won't last much longer. My husband insisted that managing the house was just the basic minimum a Roomba could handle. So I got a job and let him take over everything. That's when he mistakenly sent our daughter to school with his mother's prescription meds instead of her lunch. This led to a child services investigation, our daughter being labeled the substance girl, and him almost losing his job and our kids, all because he couldn't remember to pay the power bill. My husband Tom always told me that managing the entire house was the bare minimum. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, helping with homework, packing school lunches, driving to practices, making beds, grocery shopping, basically everything but his job seemed like a breeze to him. He'd walk in at 5 p.m. and be on the couch with a beer. By 6 p.m., meanwhile, I'd been on the go since morning and wouldn't stop until bedtime. This never bothered me until I started noticing Tom's true feelings. It was usually small remarks at dinner that I'd brush off. Like when our daughter Anunis mentioned her friend's mom. A surgeon, Tom would chime in, "Now that's a real career," staring right at me. Or at company events, when asked about my job, he'd just say, "She's just a housewife." The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. He'd walk past me scrubbing toilets and jokingly mumble, "Rough life." At parent-teacher conferences, he'd cut me off to translate what the teacher meant, making me feel too dumb to understand English. When the washing machine broke and I fixed it using a YouTube video, he told his friends I just got lucky pressing buttons. He'd FaceTime his mom while I cooked dinner, panning the camera over me and saying, "Look, Mom, Sarah's pretending to be busy again." Every year, when I organized our taxes, receipts, and bills, he'd joke that even monkeys can sort papers. When our neighbors noticed how tired I was and suggested to Tom that I could use some help, he'd remind them that hiring a housekeeper would be pointless because Sarah barely does anything a Roomba can't handle. The more I dwelled on it, the angrier I got. Then, at a family dinner, I hit my breaking point. Tom's brother was visiting, and Tom was boasting about his recent promotion, which I was genuinely happy about. After his big speech, his brother asked what I'd been up to. I actually felt a surge of excitement. No one ever really asked me that. I was about to answer, but Tom cut me off, saying, "Oh, you know my Sarah, she doesn't do much. Her biggest decision of the day is probably choosing between paper and plastic straws." Everyone laughed. Even my kids laughed. I sat there, cutting my chicken, and something inside me just clicked. That night, I updated my resume for the first time in 15 years. I'd been a marketing director before Anunis was born, but Tom insisted one of us stay home. I applied to 5 jobs and quickly got an offer from a tech company. The pay was $15,000 less than Tom's, but I took it immediately. On Sunday night, before my Monday start date, I made a fantastic dinner, pot roast, Tom's favorite. As we ate, I casually announced I'd gotten a job and would start tomorrow. Tom chuckled like I was telling a joke. "Doing what exactly?" I asked, watching his face change as I explained the marketing role. The kids looked confused, as if they couldn't grasp Mom doing anything outside the house. "You can't be serious," Tom replied. "Who's going to handle everything here?" "The kids have practice and Nunis has her recital coming up. My mother needs her prescriptions picked up every week. I'm sure you'll figure it out," I added, taking another bite of pot roast. The next morning I left at 7 a.m. sharp. Tom was fumbling with the coffee maker. Anunis complained about not having clean volleyball shorts. Jake couldn't find his science textbook. I grabbed my bag and travel mug and walked out the door. My first week was incredible. I'd forgotten how good it felt to use my brain for something beyond family logistics. My coworkers treated me like a capable professional with actual thoughts and ideas. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up. Tom missed a crucial client meeting because he had to pick up Jake from school. Anunis had to wear dirty gym clothes. They ate takeout 4 nights in a row. By week 2, Tom was begging me to quit. This isn't working, Sarah. The house is a mess. I can't handle my job and all this other stuff. Other stuff? I asked. You mean the bare minimum? Month 1 ended with Tom gaining 15 pounds from fast food, and his boss pulled him aside to discuss his sudden performance issues. The kids were constantly complaining. Anunis missed her recital because Tom forgot to put it on his calendar. Jake failed a test because no one helped him study. By the 3rd month, Tom's life had completely unraveled. His brother arrived for Thanksgiving and was stunned by the condition of the house. Dishes were piled high and laundry was everywhere. Tom looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. His brother asked, "Dude, what happened to Mr. Moneybags?" I had to hide my smirk behind my wine glass. Month 4 brought the ultimate breaking point. Tom's company announced layoffs. He called me from his car, sobbing, "Sarah, I can't lose this job. Not now. Not when I can barely function. Please, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what you did. I'm drowning here." I agreed to help him through the layoff scare, but I warned him things would change. He needed to start pulling his weight around the house. He agreed before I even finished speaking. A week later, I got my promotion. Things were going pretty smoothly, both at work and at home. Then, someone knocked on my office door. "Your husband called 6 times about an emergency at your daughter's school." I checked my phone. 34 missed calls. 15 from the school. The police had left a voicemail. Tom's last text read, "Sarah, please call me back." I think I really messed up. Like, legal trouble messed up, my assistant added. "There's also a woman here claiming to be your mother-in-law's lawyer." My heart pounded as I fumbled for my car keys, sprinting out of the office. The drive to Anonis's school felt endless, even though I made it in 12 minutes flat. Police cars lined the parking lot, their lights flashing against the brick building. Parents gathered in worried groups near the entrance. Tom stood by the principal's office door, pale and sweating. The moment he saw me, he grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the other parents, his hands shaking. The principal emerged from her office with a severe frown, motioning for us to follow her inside. The small room felt suffocating with Tom, me, the principal, and 2 police officers crammed together. One officer held a plastic evidence bag containing what looked like prescription bottles. Tom squirmed anxiously as the principal spoke. Apparently, he'd picked up his mother's prescriptions that morning and left the bag in the car. When he dropped Anunis off late, she grabbed what she thought was her lunch bag. Instead, she'd taken a bag full of illegal narcotics to school. The situation escalated when Anunis, confused by her lunch, showed the bottles to her teacher. The teacher immediately called the office. The school went on lockdown. Police were called. Drug-sniffing dogs swept the premises. I watched Tom shrink in his chairs. The officers explained the gravity of bringing prescription medications onto school grounds, even by accident. They used terms like hazard, negligence, and investigation. My stomach churned. The principal informed us that Anunis was traumatized. She'd been questioned by police, pulled out of class in front of everyone, and was now crying in the nurse's office. Other parents were demanding answers. The school board would need to meet to discuss the incident. After an hour of questioning and paperwork, the officers decided not to arrest Tom, but warned that the case would be thoroughly investigated. We'd have to attend mandatory meetings with child services. Even though Anunis had done nothing wrong, the school was considering suspending her. I found Anunis in the nurse's office, her face red and swollen from crying. She wouldn't even look at Tom. On the way home, she sat in the back seat, arms crossed, staring out the window. Tom tried to apologize, but she just turned her music up louder. Jake had walked home from school and was already there. News travels fast in our district. He looked at Tom, angry and disappointed. Apparently, kids were already texting about Anunis, calling her the drug girl. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Other parents wanted to know what happened. My boss texted, asking if I'd be back at work today. The school counselor scheduled mandatory sessions. Tom's mother called multiple times, confused why her prescriptions were at the police station. Tom paced the living room, running his fingers through his hair. He kept rambling that it wasn't his fault that anyone could make this mistake. But I noticed he couldn't meet my gaze. The doorbell rang. Tom's mother stood there with a woman in a sharp business suit. She introduced herself as an attorney hired to help with the situation. She immediately asked about the school's procedures, and if we had grounds to fight any disciplinary action. I excused myself to check on the kids. Eunice had locked herself in her room. Through the door, I could hear her on the phone with friends, trying to explain what happened. Her voice trembled as she insisted she had no idea what was in the bag. Jake sat at the kitchen table, his schoolwork spread out but untouched. He looked up when I came in, his face serious and older than his years. He asked if we were getting divorced. That question hit me like a gut punch. I returned to find the lawyer outlining the potential consequences. The school could consider expulsion. Child Protective Services would definitely investigate. Tom might even face criminal charges depending on the inquiry's findings. Our family would be under intense scrutiny for months. Tom had gone from claiming Sarah barely does anything a Roomba couldn't handle to accidentally making our daughter the school's most infamous lunch bearer in record time. Tom's mother insisted it was all a mistake and that her son was a good father. But I caught her giving Tom disappointed glances when she thought no one was watching. She'd already warned him about being careless with her pills. The lawyer left, with a retainer check and an agreement to contact the school administration. Tom's mother left soon after, but not before pulling me aside. She whispered, "I've been telling Tom for months he needs to step up." She'd noticed how overwhelmed he was. That evening, no one wanted dinner. Eunice refused to leave her room. Jake opted for cereal before retreating to play video games. Tom sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, frantically searching for legal precedents regarding unintentional substance possession on school property. I tried to focus on work emails, but it was impossible. My promotion celebration felt like a lifetime ago. Everything we'd built, the stability I'd worked so hard for, was on the verge of collapse because of one careless mistake. The school called again. An emergency board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning. We had to show up and explain ourselves. Other parents demanded Eunice be removed from school activities until the investigation was complete. Her volleyball season might be over.
Oh.
Tom finally broke down at 10 p.m. that night. He slumped on the couch, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He admitted he'd been so focused on proving he could handle everything that he took shortcuts leaving. Things in the car, forgetting appointments, making dangerous mistakes. But his confession felt hollow. The damage was done. Eunice's reputation at school was shattered. Her family was under investigation. My new job, which had been going so well, now had a dark cloud over it. My coworkers would whisper about the woman whose family brought drugs to school. I spent the night compiling lists of lawyers to call, documents to gather, and character references to contact. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, dealing with yet another problem, another disaster, all because Tom couldn't manage even the most basic household tasks. By morning, I had a plan. We'd fight the school's disciplinary action, fully cooperate with the inquiry, and get Eunice into counseling to deal with the trauma. But things at home would have to change drastically. Tom's struggle was finally over. Professional help, household systems, whatever it took. The emergency board meeting was set for 8 a.m. I dressed sharply and professionally. Tom put on his best suit, though it hung loosely on his frame from his weight loss. Eunice refused to go, so we arranged for her to stay with my sister. The meeting room was packed. Other parents filled the chairs, their faces a mix of concern and condemnation. I recognized a few from PTA meetings where I'd organized fundraisers and events. Now, they treated us like dangerous outsiders. The board president called the meeting to order. What followed was an hour-long, heated debate about school safety, zero-tolerance policies, and the message this sent to other students, one by one. Parents stood up to voice their fears and demand action. Tom tried to explain. his voice trembling. He described the morning's chaos, his mother's medical needs, and the honest mistake. But his words were met with a wall of parental fury. Someone suggested calling the local news. Another proposed a petition to ban our family from school grounds. Finally, I stood up. My voice remained steady as I reminded them of my years of volunteer work, the fundraisers I'd organized, and the classroom parties I'd hosted. I pleaded with them to consider the trauma inflicted on an innocent child who had done nothing wrong, but grabbed the wrong bag. The room fell silent. A few parents looked embarrassed as they recalled how I'd helped their children or supported their initiatives. But the damage to our reputation was clear. Even if Anuna stayed in school, she'd carry the stigma. Kids can be cruel, and parents can be even harsher. After the meeting, we sat in the car in silence. Tom stared at the steering wheel, defeated. I thought about all those dinners where he'd belittled my contributions. He often called my work the bare minimum. Now he couldn't even manage that without causing a crisis that jeopardized everyone. My phone vibrated with a text from my boss. She was understanding but worried. This kind of family drama could impact my performance and reputation at work. My hard-earned promotion suddenly felt precarious. One family crisis had spilled into my professional life. We drove home to find reporters from the local newspaper parked outside. Seemed someone from the meeting had tipped them off. A substance scare at local elementary school would make an interesting headline. Tom rushed inside, and I politely declined to comment. Jake was inside, stress-eating cereal from the box and playing video games. He'd missed school, too humiliated to answer questions about his sister. The house felt like a bunker. We were all hiding from the outside world and each other. I knew then that Tom's inability to handle basic household management had led to a cascading disaster. One mistake with a prescription bag had undone months of progress. My job, our children's, stability, and our family's reputation were all on the line because he couldn't keep track of the most fundamental details. The lawyer called with updates. The police investigation would last weeks. Child services would start home visits soon. The school board would vote on disciplinary action at their next regular meeting. Meanwhile, Enonis would attend classes under a safety plan that felt more like punishment. That night, I lay awake wondering how we'd ended up here. Tom had mocked my contributions, and now, through sheer incompetence, he'd nearly destroyed our family. The man who thought managing a household was beneath him had proven he couldn't even do it safely. The next morning brought new challenges. Enonis's volleyball coach called to say she was benched pending the investigation. Her grades were slipping due to the stress. Jake was acting out, arguing with teachers. Our family was falling apart because of Tom's blunder. I threw myself into damage control, and my days were filled with meetings. Lawyers, school administrators, counselors. My understanding boss gave me some slack, but I knew her patience had limits. My promotion was slipping away. As I dealt with yet another family crisis, Tom, meanwhile, seemed paralyzed. He went through the motions at work, but came home defeated every day. The domestic tasks he'd once scorned now seemed like insurmountable hurdles. The confident man who dismissed my work was gone, replaced by someone consumed by laundry and meal planning. 3 weeks into the crisis, child services conducted their first home visit. They inspected everything, asked probing questions, and took notes on their tablets. They interviewed each child individually. Nunes cried during her interview. Jake was moody and uncooperative. Tom fumbled through his explanations. The investigators' report would determine if we could keep our family together. Every interaction was overshadowed by that possibility. Simple conversations turned into tense negotiations. Family dinners were quiet affairs, where each of us was lost in our own anxieties about what might happen next. I found myself doing what I always did, handling everything. But suddenly, it felt different. This wasn't about proving my worth or earning respect. This was about survival, keeping our family from collapsing. All because Tom couldn't handle fundamental responsibilities he'd dismissed as trivial. The irony was brutal. After years of calling my job the bare minimum, he couldn't even meet that standard without jeopardizing our children and ruining our name. The person who felt I accomplished nothing had demonstrated that doing everything required skills he simply lacked. As another sleepless night gave way to morning, I wondered if we'd ever recover. The investigation would eventually close, but the damage to our family might be permanent. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, and Tom had shattered more than just trust. He'd compromised the very foundation of our children's safety. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more damage control, and more attempts to fix what Tom's negligence had caused. The bare minimum had never seemed so difficult to achieve. The morning after that terrible night, I woke to find Tom already gone. A sticky note on the coffee maker said he'd left early to meet his boss about his performance issues. I got the kids ready in silence. Anunis barely touched her breakfast, and Jake wore his headphones the whole time. At work, my team was prepping. For our quarterly board presentation, I'd been leading this project for weeks, and it represented everything I'd achieved since my promotion. But as I finished reviewing my slides, my assistant knocked frantically. Tom was in the lobby, insisting he needed to speak with me about a family emergency. I found him pacing near the security desk, disheveled and anxious. The instant he saw me, he grabbed my shoulders and explained that Child Services had demanded an immediate home check. They'd received an anonymous complaint about maltreatment and wanted to investigate within the hour. My presentation was set to start in 30 minutes. My supervisor appeared in the lobby, having heard about the incident. She looked between Tom and me, concerned. I briefly explained the problem, watching her face shift from sympathetic to worried. She reminded me the board presentation couldn't be rescheduled. It was crucial to the quarter's strategy. Tom insisted I come home immediately, saying the investigator specifically requested both parents be present. Tom's timing truly was impeccable. Nothing screams I support your career like dragging your wife out of a board presentation for a mess he created. Kept checking his phone, and I saw missed calls from an unknown number. His hands shook as he scrolled through messages. I made a decision that felt like choosing between two impossible options. I handed my presentation, notes to my assistant, quickly outlining the main points. She looked terrified but nodded. Then I followed Tom to the parking lot, my heels clicking on the pavement as we rushed to his car. The drive home revealed even more problems. Tom admitted he hadn't paid the electricity bill, and our power had been cut off that morning. He'd been trying to get it reconnected before the inspection. The house wasn't just powerless. It was also a disaster from weeks of neglect. We arrived to find a Child Services investigator already parked outside. She stood on our porch, clipboard in hand, checking her watch. Tom fumbled with his keys as I mentally inventoried everything wrong in our dark, disorganized home. The investigator introduced herself as Ms. Davis, her manner professional as she explained the basis of the complaint. Someone had reported our children were living in squalor, arriving at school disheveled and hungry. She needed to verify their living conditions. Immediately inside, the house told its own story. Dishes overflowed the sink. Laundry formed mountains in every room. Without power, the refrigerator had started to smell. Trash bags cluttered the hallway where Tom had started cleaning, but never finished. Ms. Davis photographed everything. Tom tried to explain the power situation, insisting it was just a missed payment, not negligence. But as we stood in the dim light filtering through dusty windows, his explanation sounded hollow. I watched him spiral, making excuses that only made things worse. I took charge, showing Ms. Davis the children's bedrooms, which I'd managed to keep relatively tidy despite everything. I produced medical records, school papers, and anything else that would prove we were caring for our children. She took notes, her expression unreadable. The inspection lasted 2 hours. She checked everything from our food supplies to the children's clothes. She asked about our daily routines, work schedules, and childcare arrangements. Tom kept interrupting with defensive statements that made us look bad. My phone buzzed constantly, messages from my assistant about the presentation disaster, my boss asking where I was, colleagues wondering if I was okay. Each notification felt like another nail in the coffin of my career. Ms. Davis left, promising to follow up within 48 hours. Tom slumped on the couch. He blamed me for not being home to manage things and for prioritizing work over family. The irony of his accusation, coming after years of him dismissing my household duties, was not lost. On me, I spent my afternoon in full crisis mode. First, I had to restore power, which meant paying the overdue bill and a reconnection fee. Then, I had to tackle the house, one room at a time. Tom sat at the kitchen table, supposedly helping, but mostly just moving things from one mess to another. The school called Eunice had a breakdown in class, sobbing uncontrollably. The counselor suggested I pick her up early. I left Tom with cleaning instructions and drove to get her, finding my daughter curled up in the nurse's office. On the way home, Eunice finally opened up. Kids were calling her names, saying her family was trash, and her father was a drug dealer someone had started. A rumor that child services would take her away. She begged me to homeschool her, to let her hide until everyone forgot. Back home, I found Tom on the phone with his mother, who was asking her to provide a character reference for the child services investigation. During our conversation, I learned she'd been telling her friends about our situation, and the news had spread through their entire social circle. That evening, while making dinner with our newly restored power, I uncovered more of Tom's failures. Unopened bills and drawers, mission slips for school events that were never signed, and a warning from Jake's teacher about numerous missing assignments. The bare minimum had become an impossible hurdle. My boss called during dinner. The board presentation had been a disaster. My assistant did her best, but without my expertise, crucial issues were left unaddressed. Our quarterly strategy was now at risk. She needed me in the office early tomorrow to do damage control. Tom overheard the call and immediately started scheming how I could take time off to manage the house. He suggested I use my sick days and work part-time until things stabilized. Still couldn't grasp how his failure to handle basic chores was destroying everything I'd worked for. The next morning brought fresh chaos. Jake refused to go to school, claiming a stomach ache. Eunice moved like a ghost, barely speaking. Tom had a crucial client meeting he couldn't miss. I stood in the kitchen, pulled in every direction, watching my carefully built world unravel. I made another difficult choice. I asked my sister to watch Jake and drove Eunice to school myself, walking her to class to ensure she attended. Then I rushed to work, arriving late to find my team in crisis mode, trying to salvage the quarterly forecast. The day was a blur of spreadsheets and worried texts from home. My sister said Jake had cried all morning. Eunice's teacher emailed about her lack of focus. Tom left anxious messages about child services calling again. During lunch, I sat in my car and called the child welfare investigator. Ms. Davis stated they'd received other complaints. Someone had reported seeing our kids walking to school alone in dirty clothes. The investigation was intensifying. I wondered, who was making these reports? Timing seemed too convenient and targeted. Then I remembered Tom's complaints about certain neighbors who'd been distant lately. Had our family drama become neighborhood entertainment? That afternoon, my manager called me into her office. She sympathized with my situation, but reminded me my performance was suffering. My promotion was based on maintaining high standards. If I couldn't handle my responsibilities, they'd have to reconsider. I left work early again, only to find Tom at home, surrounded by cleaning supplies, having accomplished nothing. He'd spent the day reading child services procedures online, convincing himself we were going to lose the kids. His panic was making everything worse. The home phone rang. It was Tom's mother. She informed us she'd hired a family advocate to help with the investigation. Then, almost casually, she added that she'd been documenting everything for months. Every time Tom called for help, every crisis he'd caused, her meticulous notes painted a damning picture: Tom's failure to manage school pickups, missed appointments, and the kids calling her crying because their father forgot to make dinner. She'd kept it all, thinking she was helping, but it now looked like evidence against us. That evening, I spent hours gathering my own documentation, receipts proving I'd managed the household finances. School records from when I was the primary, caregiver and character references from teachers who'd worked with me for years. Building a defense felt surreal. Around 8 p.m., a newness came out of her room and asked if we were going to lose our house. The question broke my heart. I told her we weren't, but uncertainty laced my voice. Our financial stability was crumbling due to investigation costs, lawyer, fees, and my job being on the line. Tom found me organizing papers at midnight. Tried to help but quickly became overwhelmed by the complexity of our situation. He again urged me to quit my job and focus on fixing things. Still didn't grasp that my income was now essential. The next day, Child Services made a second visit. Ms. Davis arrived with a colleague, and the inspection was even more thorough than before. They interviewed each child separately in their rooms while Tom and I waited in the main area, forbidden to interrupt. Jake's interview lasted 40 minutes. We could hear his muffled voice through the door but couldn't make out the words. Ananas's was shorter, but left her in tears. The investigators took more photos and notes, their faces revealing nothing. After they left, the children were withdrawn and scared. Anunis mumbled that they'd asked if she felt safe at home and if anyone had hurt her. Jake said they wanted to know about his meals, homework help, and why he'd missed school. Normal questions that felt incredibly intrusive given our circumstances. My phone rang with another work-related crisis. A major client threatened to pull out because of the disastrous presentation. My team needed me right then, but Tom had a mandatory HR meeting about his performance issues, and someone had to be home with the kids. I called the only support I had left, my mother. She lived 3 hours away but dropped everything to come help. While I waited for her, I took work calls, trying to salvage the client relationship remotely. Tom emerged from his meeting, looking utterly defeated. He'd been put on a performance improvement plan. One more mistake, and he'd be fired. The man who'd once mocked my contributions now faced losing the job he'd prioritized above all else. My mother arrived to a scene of utter chaos. She took one look and started organizing with military precision. She sent Tom to the grocery store. With a detailed list, she set up Jake's homework. She sat with Anunis and let her talk about her school problems. I escaped to my office, where my staff was frantically preparing for an emergency client meeting. We had 2 hours to put together a presentation that could save $1 million. A power outage had happened during a child services appointment that would certainly look great on the inspection report. Nothing screams stable home environment like conducting interviews by candlelight while your refrigerator slowly turns into a science experiment. My assistant had prepared the documents, but the strategy needed my expertise. The meeting was brutal. Client questioned every projection and strategic point. They brought up the terrible board presentation and wondered if our company could still deliver. I fought for every single point, drawing on years of experience to rebuild their trust. We barely avoided losing the account, but the victory felt hollow when I checked my phone and found several missed calls from home. Tom had forgotten to pick up his mother's medications again. Pharmacy was closed. She needed her meds tonight. I called every drugstore in town until I found one open 24 hours that could fill an emergency prescription. Then I rushed there. Before heading home, adding yet another task to my endless list, the bare minimum had become an unbearable burden. At home, I found my mother had worked miracles. The house was clean, the kids were calm, and dinner was ready. But she pulled me aside to voice her concerns. Tom seems incapable of following simple instructions, she said. He'd bought the wrong groceries, forgotten half of them, and spent the budget on expensive pre-made foods. That night, my mother offered to stay and help for a week. I wanted to refuse to prove I could handle it, but reality hit. We needed help. Tom's incompetence had triggered a crisis that threatened to undo everything we'd achieved. The next morning brought new complications. The school called about Ananas's attendance. She'd been marked absent from 3 classes despite being dropped off. They found her hiding in the restroom, too anxious to face her peers. I left another critical meeting to deal with it. The school counselor recommended immediate therapy. The principal suggested Anunis consider transferring to their alternative program. For students in crisis, my Strata daughter was being labeled problematic. Meanwhile, Tom texted that Child Services had contacted us to schedule a family assessment. We'd need to meet with a psychologist to evaluate our family dynamics. The investigation was moving beyond simple home visits. I sat in the school parking lot, making calls to schedule therapy, notify our lawyer, and reschedule business meetings. Each call felt like admitting defeat. Tom's inability to handle basic responsibilities was causing the life I'd carefully built to crumble. My boss texted, asking if I was available for a conference next week. It was a crucial networking opportunity, a chance to build alliances that would secure my job. However, it would mean 3 days away from home during the investigation. That evening, I found Tom trying to help Jake with his homework, but he was teaching math incorrectly, confusing our son even more. When I gently corrected him, he exploded. Accusing me of undermining him, Jake ran to his room in tears. My mother stepped in, sending Tom to cool down while she comforted Jake. She later told me she'd never seen Tom so desperate and defensive. She worried about his mental state and urged him to seek professional help too. The family assessment was scheduled for Friday. We spent the week preparing, trying to present a united front, but every interaction revealed new cracks. Tom couldn't remember basic details about the kids' schedules. He mixed up their teachers' names, friendships, and interests. And Eunice refused to leave her room the morning of the assessment. She had stress hives and was scratching until she bled. Jake wet his bed for the first time in years. Our family was truly falling apart under the pressure. Psychologist Dr. O'Daniel arrived right on time. She observed our family interactions, asking pointed questions and taking extensive notes. Tom tried too hard to appear competent, making obvious mistakes that she clearly noticed. During the individual interviews, I could hear Tom's nervous laughter through the walls. He was overcompensating, which likely made the situation worse. The children were withdrawn, giving brief answers. The entire assessment felt like we were watching our family through a stranger's critical eyes. Dr. O'Daniel left, promising to present her findings within a week. Her expression gave nothing away, but I saw her glance at Tom with concern. Or was it pity? I couldn't tell which was worse. That weekend, my mother returned home, unable to extend her visit. She hugged me and warned that something had to change, drastically. She'd seen how Tom operated or failed to operate and was worried about our future. Monday started with an email that chilled me to the bone. The school board had voted. Eunice was allowed to continue attending school. But she was banned from all extracurricular activities until the investigation was complete. No volleyball. No clubs. No normal teenage life. I watched my daughter read the email, and something inside her broke. She'd fought so hard to earn her spot on the volleyball team. Because her father couldn't keep track of a prescription bag, it was all gone. The injustice was sickening. Tom responded by blaming the school, the system, and everyone but himself. He complained about unfair treatment as I called to appeal the decision, knowing it was futile. The damage to our reputation was too severe. My job suffered as I tried to manage crises. Projects fell behind. Meetings were rescheduled. My teammates tried to cover, but my absence was obvious. The promotion I'd earned was slipping away, replaced by whispers about my complicated personal life. Then came the letter from Child Services. The investigation was escalating. They ordered both parents to undergo psychological evaluations, attend parenting seminars, and have regular check-ins. Failure to comply would result in formal legal action. I stared at the letter, reflecting on how we'd gotten here. Tom had belittled my work before destroying our family through his incompetence. The man who considered household management beneath him had proven he couldn't even do it safely. That night, I made a choice. I contacted our lawyer and asked about separation proceedings. It's not a divorce yet, but something had to change. Tom's inability to function as an adult was dragging all of us down. Kids needed stability, something I couldn't provide while constantly cleaning up his messes. Attorney explained the complexities. With an active child services investigation, any major changes could be viewed negatively. We were trapped in a broken dynamic, unable to change it without risking everything. The system meant to protect us was now holding us captive. I found Tom in the garage trying to organize tools he'd never used. When I walked in, he looked up, his face showing the strain of the past few weeks. For a brief moment, I saw the man I'd married before his arrogance and incompetence exposed his true nature. We talked for hours that night, without arguing, about how we'd reached this point, what needed to change, and if our marriage could survive his failure to handle the responsibilities he'd scorned for so long. Tom finally accepted the truth. He'd never mastered basic life skills. His mother had done everything. Then I did. He'd gone through life thinking household management was easy because someone else did it for him. Now confronted with reality, he was drowning. But admitting it wasn't enough. The investigation continued. The damage to our children persisted. My career was hanging by a thread, and Tom's sudden insight didn't magically make him competent. So we were still in crisis, but now with increased self-awareness. The next morning brought yet another emergency. Jake's teacher called to discuss a disturbing essay he'd written about his home life. Nothing suggested abuse, but there was enough concern to warrant an intervention. Another report to Child Services. Another strike against Tom. After that call, I sat in my car wondering if we'd ever escape this downward spiral. Every attempt to fix one problem seemed to create two more. Tom's initial mistake had triggered an avalanche that buried our entire family. The bare minimum had become an unattainable standard. As I drove to work late again, I considered the bitter irony. After years of dismissing my contributions, Tom's inability to match them was destroying everything. The person who believed I accomplished nothing had proven that managing everything required skills, dedication, and competence that he simply didn't possess. The reality was harsh but clear. Tom hadn't just failed to meet the basic requirements. He'd failed our family in ways that might be irreversible. I was left picking up the pieces, trying to salvage what remained of the life we'd built. While he struggled with tasks he'd once dismissed as simple, tomorrow would bring the psychiatric evaluation results. Child Services recommendations, more meetings, more crisis management, and more attempts to hold a family together after Tom's recklessness shattered it. The bare minimum had never felt more out of reach. The psychological evaluation results arrived in a thick package. I opened it with shaking hands as Tom hovered nearby, wringing his hands. Dr. O'Daniel's report was detailed and scathing. She highlighted Tom's inability to recall basic details about his children's lives, his defensive answers to simple questions, and most alarmingly, his clear lack of understanding of household management despite months of supposed effort. My evaluation was different. She praised my organizational skills, my deep understanding of the children's needs, and my ability to maintain structure in the face of crisis. However, she expressed concern about my stress levels and the feasibility of me doing everything alone. The recommendation was clear. Tom needed intensive parenting classes, ongoing monitoring, and family therapy. Tom snatched the papers from me and quickly scanned them. His face flushed from pale to crimson as he read. He crumpled the pages, then smoothed them out again, as if changing their physical form might alter the text. I watched him pace the kitchen, grumbling about biased evaluations and unfair assessments. The next morning I woke to find Tom already dressed in his best suit. He'd made breakfast burnt eggs and soggy toast, but the effort was clear. He said he was taking the day off to manage things, and I should go to work without worrying. The conviction in his voice almost made me trust him. At the office, I tried to focus on the partnership opportunities that could save my job. My team had worked tirelessly to prepare materials after the client issue, but focusing was hard when Anonys's school called. She'd had a panic attack during PE and was now in the nurse's office. I found my daughter curled in a chair, her breathing shallow and rapid. The nurse revealed that some girls had teased her about the drug incident. They'd formed a circle around her, chanting about her criminal family. Anunus had collapsed, hyperventilating. The principal appeared and suggested we take the alternative program more seriously. Regular classes were becoming too much for Anunus. She handed me brochures about their Fresh Start initiative for struggling students. My Strata daughter was being put into a program for troubled kids. I drove Anunus home in silence. She glanced out the window, occasionally wiping away tears. At a red light, she finally spoke, asking if we could move. Start over somewhere no one knew about the prescription bag incident. The pain in her voice was unbearable. At home, I found utter chaos. Tom had tried to clean but mixed cleaning solutions, creating noxious fumes. Windows were open and fans were blasting. Jake sat outside on the porch, his schoolwork scattered by the wind. Tom emerged from the bathroom coughing and with watery eyes. He'd also tried doing laundry, mixing colors and whites, and shrinking Jake's school uniform. The kitchen showed signs of his lunch efforts. A grease fire had left black streaks on the ceiling. He'd ordered pizza instead, and the boxes were piled on the counter. My mother called as I surveyed the damage. She'd heard from Tom's mother about the evaluation results. The two grandmothers had been talking and comparing notes. She volunteered to move in temporarily to ensure stability during the investigation. I wanted to accept, but I knew it would make it seem like we couldn't cope. That evening, Tom announced he'd enrolled in the required parenting seminars. They started next week, 3 nights and Saturdays. He proudly handed me the calendar, unaware. It clashed with Jake's basketball games and Anonymous therapy appointments. I spent hours adjusting schedules, begging for carpool favors, and arguing with my boss for flexible hours. Each accommodation felt like a step backward for my career. The conference next week loomed, but attending seemed impossible. The doorbell rang after dinner. Our elderly neighbor stood there, holding a casserole and looking concerned. She'd noticed the police visits, the social workers, and the anxiety on the children's faces. She promised to help however she could, emphasizing she'd raised 5 children herself. Her kindness shattered something in me. I took the dish with trembling hands. Fighting back tears, she touched my arm, whispering that she'd noticed Tom's struggles with simple things. Our family was falling apart, and everyone in the neighborhood had seen it. Tom found me crying in the bathroom afterward, tried to comfort me, but his touch felt hollow. He vowed that things would improve once he finished the seminars and learned the protocols. But we both knew the damage went far beyond scheduling and household management. The next day, the first parenting class began. I drove Tom there, watching him walk inside with other parents who'd struggled in various ways. The instructor greeted them with a professional cheerfulness that didn't hide the serious nature of their meeting. While Tom was in class, I took the kids for ice cream. Jake picked at his sundae, eventually revealing that students at school were avoiding him. Parents had told their children not to associate with our family. He'd been eating lunch alone for weeks. Anunis also said her former friends had started a group chat specifically to exclude her. Screenshots of their hateful messages had spread. She showed me one that called her father a drug dealer, and another that implied she was the same. Teenage cruelty is amplified by parental anxieties. I dropped them off at home and returned to pick up Tom. He emerged from class looking stunned. After covering basic child development, the instructor realized how little he knew about his own children's needs. The other parents had shared their shortcomings, and Tom saw himself in their experiences. On the way home, he tried to process everything he'd learned. They talked about emotional availability, consistent routines, and active participation, all things I'd been practicing for years, but which seemed new to him. He pulled out a workbook with pages of exercises on understanding your child's perspective. That weekend, Child Services paid another visit. Ms. Davis noted improvements in the house's condition but was still concerned about the family's mental state. She interviewed the children again and their responses reflected the persistent tension. Despite our efforts, she pulled me aside afterward and spoke more candidly. The investigation would last at least 3 more months. Any negative reports could lead to formal procedures. She urged me to document everything, including Tom's participation. In required activities, I spent Sunday keeping detailed logs while Tom tried to apply his class lessons. He attempted to talk to Jake about basketball, but his forced enthusiasm felt awkward. He tried to help Anunis with her schoolwork but got frustrated when he couldn't understand the material. Monday began with an email that made my stomach drop. The conference had been moved up. I had to go tomorrow for 3 days. Missing it would practically end my chances for advancement. However, leaving during the investigation felt like abandoning my family. I called both my mother and Tom's mother to try and arrange coverage. Both could help but were worried about. Tom's ability to coordinate their efforts, simple tasks like school pickup times and prescription schedules, seemed beyond his capacity to communicate clearly. That evening, I prepared precise calendars, emergency contact lists, and meal plans. Everything was color-coded and posted throughout the house. Tom watched me work and said he could manage 3 days. His confidence seemed forced. The children's reactions varied. Jake was worried about his father remembering basketball practice, and Eunice asked if Grandma could handle everything instead. Neither trusted Tom to manage a crisis, and I couldn't blame them. I made a decision. The conference was vital to our financial stability. We'd lose everything if I didn't have a job. I booked my flight, arranged for grandmother care, and prepared for 3 days away. Tom would have to step up or fail completely. I left before dawn on the morning of my departure. Tom was already awake, intently studying my schedules. Set multiple alarms, organized the kids' clothes, and prepared breakfast supplies. The effort was genuine, even if the execution remained uncertain. On the plane, I received anxious texts from Tom about where to find lunch money and permission slip dates. Each question showed how little he'd learned after months of struggle. I responded calmly while boarding, knowing contact would be limited. Once airborne, conference began with networking sessions I'd been looking forward to for months. Industry executives highlighted collaborations that could change our company's trajectory. I forced myself to concentrate, to project the professional image I'd built despite my internal turmoil. Between sessions, I checked my phone. 16 missed calls, texts from both grandparents about scheduling issues, a voicemail from school about Jake arriving late, and another from Eunice crying over missing therapy appointments. I excused myself from a key dinner to manage the crisis over the phone. Tom had completely mixed up the grandparent schedules, sending them both to pick up the kids at the same time. They'd argued in the school parking lot while the students waited, embarrassed. The second day brought worse news. Tom had neglected to give Eunice her anxiety medicine. She'd had another panic attack at school. The counselor recommended an emergency psychiatric evaluation. Child Services had been contacted about medical neglect. I sat in my hotel room weighing my options. Flying home would mean the end of my career advancement. Staying meant risking an escalation with Child Services. Called our lawyer, who urged me to keep documenting, but cautioned against neglecting professional responsibilities. My talk on strategic relationships took place on the final day of the conference. I presented it brilliantly, even as my phone buzzed with impending disasters. My professional facade remained intact, even while my personal life shattered via text messages. The flight home felt endless. I'd forged 2 major connections and impressed senior management. However, knowing what awaited me made the success feel hollow. Tom's final text message was ominous. "We need to talk." Made matters worse, I apologize. I found my family in various states of distress. Eunice was locked in her room. Jake was playing video games, surrounded by empty food containers. Tom sat at the kitchen table, official-looking documents strewn before him. Child Services had issued an emergency order. The medication incident, combined with ongoing concerns, necessitated additional surveillance, daily check-ins, a mandatory psychiatric evaluation for Eunice, and increased parent education for Tom. The grandmothers had kept meticulous notes about the 3-day calamity, including missed meals forgotten, pickups, and abandoned assignments. Tom's attempts to follow my schedule had devolved into paralyzing confusion. Those grandmothers were coordinating their information like a spy network. While Tom had turned the house into a chemistry experiment gone wrong, the man learned the hard way that poisonous fumes are not a cleaning feature. They had practically moved in to prevent total collapse. I spent the night dealing with the fallout, scheduling psychiatrist visits, responding to Child Services obligations, and calming distraught children. Tom sat nearby, defeated and silent, occasionally apologizing for specific failures. The next morning, I arrived at work to find my partnerships approved and a pay raise granted. The irony wasn't lost on me. Professional triumph, as my personal life imploded. My supervisor complimented me, but expressed concern over my obvious exhaustion. Ananas's psychological evaluation revealed acute anxiety requiring immediate treatment. The doctor prescribed medication and intensive therapy. She explained how the cumulative stress had triggered a catastrophe that would take months to address. Tom's advanced parenting lessons began that week. The instructor approached me after I dropped him off, noting his difficulty with simple concepts. She offered private counseling to address his deeper issues with responsibility and competence. We developed new routines out of necessity. The grandmothers alternated days. I adjusted my work schedule around appointments. Tom used strict checklists for all domestic tasks. The children went through their days exhausted. The breakthrough happened unexpectedly. Tom found Jake in tears over a school assignment about family heroes. He'd written about me, but crossed it out, embarrassed by our family's reputation. Tom found him rewriting it to feature a fake character instead. Something shifted in Tom that night. He spent hours helping Jake rewrite the project, recognizing how his mistakes had harmed the family. He openly shared his own struggles, admitting he'd never learned to value domestic work until he was forced to do it. The following parenting class focused on emotional intelligence. Tom returned with insights about his dismissive attitude, which stemmed from feelings of inadequacy. Instead of learning, he'd belittled his inability to perform certain tasks. The instructor had given exercises on validation and appreciation. Tom began making significant improvements, gradually and incrementally, rather than frantically as he had before. He started by mastering one task before moving to the next. Breakfast became his consistent contribution. Then school lunch as small victories. Child services noted the changes during their next visit. Ms. Davis witnessed Tom skillfully handling morning chores as I prepared for work. She observed his interactions with the children, finding genuine interest rather than forced performance. Ananas's psychological care helped her slowly return to normal classes. Her anxiety persisted, but became manageable. She started eating lunch with an understanding friend whose mother had reached out despite community pressure. Jake's teacher noticed an improvement in his focus. Even with a precarious home life, he was able to concentrate on his studies. He made the basketball team, and Tom went to every practice, learning the sport alongside his son. My job stabilized as my personal life became more predictable. The partnerships I'd forged began to yield results. A manager recognized my efforts. Despite personal obstacles, the promotion I'd received now felt secure rather than uncertain. Tom's graduation from basic parenting classes was underwhelming. He earned a diploma that was insufficient for the journey, but he truly absorbed the lessons, finally understanding what I'd quietly done for years. The Child Services investigation was officially closed after 6 months. Ms. Davis's final assessment acknowledged excellent progress and ongoing stability. She praised our willingness to change while admitting the continuing challenges we faced. That evening, we enjoyed a peaceful family dinner. Tom had cooked nothing fancy, but tasty and healthy. The children went about their day without tension. I didn't have to manage or direct. It was just normal. Later, Tom found me paying bills, something he'd never seen before. He sat next to me and asked to learn the system I'd created. Not because he had to, but because he finally realized it was important. I showed him the spreadsheets, automated payments, and meticulous planning that had kept us solvent. He apologized again, but this time with genuine awareness of years of dismissal, rather than the desperate apologies of a crisis. He saw now that the bare minimum was the foundation that held everything together. We weren't fixed. Trust remained shaky. The children still watched him warily. I still carried the majority of the mental load, but Tom began to contribute consciously and consistently. He discovered that competence came through practice, not dismissal. Anunas joined the volleyball team the next year. Tom drove her to every practice, understanding the rules and supporting her properly. Jake thrived in school with both parents present. Our family functioned imperfectly, but honestly. I maintained my promotion and expanded those connections. My career flourished with genuine home support. Never again implied that my work was less valuable than his. He learned through failure what I'd always known. The bare minimum was far from minimal. Everything was necessary for life to exist. Finally, after near destruction, our family realized the truth. We moved forward, scarred but wiser, building something lasting from the rubble of Tom's hard-learned lesson. The fact that it took a complete system collapse for him to recognize the invisible magic of clean socks and packed lunches would be amusing if it weren't so tragically true.